Major support for these programs is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chelsea Lighting. Additional support is provided by Briarwood Organization, Bruce Mosler, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Flushing Bank, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Genova Burns, Giantomasi and Webster, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin, Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey-Knackel Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, the Wickoff Group, Urban American, and Ackman Ziff Real Estate, Aerial Property Advisors, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, Goldman Properties, Moynihan Group, Must Development, RAL Development Services, the Spandrel Group, LLC, Rosewood Realty Group, Terra CRG, Triangle Equities.
You know, there are restaurants in New York and around the country that are, you know, the Brasserie, the Sea Grill, Lincoln, Patina. You know, there are certain institutions that people remember. And I'm lucky today because I have the person who's the CEO of the Patina Restaurant Group, Nick Valenti. Thanks for being here, Nick.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me.
So, Nick, tell me a little bit about you, your mother, your father. When we got together, you were telling me that your parents came over in the early 50s.
My family immigrated from Italy. My dad came over in 51 and worked for a year, and then the rest of the family followed a year later.
Now, where were you born?
I was born in Italy, in Calabria.
And your father, you said, came over here and he was in the construction trade.
He was a construction worker, and he worked diligently and brought the family over, as I said, about a year later.
And you were living out in Freeport?
We grew up in Freeport, Long Island. We moved right to Freeport from when we came from Italy, and grew up mainly in Freeport. We moved to Belmore some years later, and then when I married, we moved, and my wife and I lived in Hewlett for a while, and now we live in Cove Neck.
So let's talk about you growing up. You had a normal childhood, right? But you know, how'd food get into the childhood?
Well, food was always part of the scene at home. You know, everyone in my family worked. I'm the youngest of 4 children, and my father worked, my 2 brothers worked, and they all worked different hours, so they came home at different times, and my mother was always cooking. It was like a restaurant at home. Someone came home at 4, someone came at 5, someone came at 6, and there would always be food on the table at that time, cooked for that meal period. So, you know, and of course my sister and I, we ate with my mother and father when my father came home from work. So there was always food. It was part of our upbringing. And then my older brother, who was in the bakery business, ultimately opened the restaurant, and I began working there when I was 12
and the name of the restaurant was?
The name of the restaurant started out was Tommy's and then became Piccolo.
And they still own the restaurant, right?
They still own the restaurant.
You were working there
it's in Belmore, Long Island.
When you were going to high school, right?
I worked there during junior high school, and left shortly before I went to college. And
Now,
then,
what were you doing in the restaurant? Did you learn?
well, yeah, in a family business, you do everything. You cook, you clean,
now
you stack.
you mentioned to me your mother even worked in the
And
restaurant.
my mother cooked at the restaurant as well, and she would come 3-4 days a week and do preparation, and we incorporated her recipes into to the menus.
So now you graduate from high school.
Yep.
And what do you decide to do?
Well, I was working. I went to school at it was then called New York City.
But how do you decide to go to the New York City? That was New York City Tech.
Well, it's tech now. I had already been in the food business working, and I had an interest. In actually, the interest I had was in casino operation. I always thought that there was a certain glamour and drama and excitement, and I didn't know very much about it. And I thought that I might learn more about it if I went to a hospitality program.
So you go to Brooklyn. I mean,
Go to Brooklyn.
I'm a Brooklyn boy, so I understand. You were a Long Island kid, so
Yeah.
you go to Brooklyn.
Go to Brooklyn, which was an experience, having grown up on Long Island, and it
Right.
was the city for me.
Right, and then
And it was a great program. The school was part of the city university.
and many when we got together, we were talking about Bruce Bozzi got out of that program, Michael LaMonaco. I mean, it's
Yeah.
been a training ground. Julian Nicoloni. It's been a training ground of a lot of major restaurant owners, operators, and chefs.
It was a great program. It provided me with background, and it really filled in what I hadn't been able to learn in a family-run operation. And it was there that I first heard about Restaurant Associates.
When you got to Restaurant Associates, and you've been there a couple of years of your life, but and you wanted to work for Restaurant Associates. I mean, Restaurant Associates was a Joe Baum entity with Brody and Baum. And tell me a little bit about the initial growth of Restaurant Associates and who they were before you even joined them.
Well, it was an unparalleled time in the restaurant industry. I think that Joe was able to demonstrate that that a restaurant could be professionally run, that you didn't have to be a French guy or an Italian guy to be into the restaurant business, that it could be run, that there was a professional way to approach and provide hospitality in a restaurant setting. And he did that with all the excitement and glamour and all of the surprise that the hospitality business provides. And he introduced things that had never been done before.
And restaurants.
Yeah.
I mean, restaurants were family owned or individually owned by an individual or a chef or something. There really wasn't a publicly held company, that
That's
owned
correct.
these major, the Forum of the 12 Caesars, La Fonda del Sol.
Exactly.
And, the Brasserie.
Brasserie.
And then the famous Four Seasons.
Four Seasons, and it went on, and there was a lot. It was a very exciting time. So, as a student at school, it was the place to go to work. If you wanted to really work for the best.
As one would say, especially going back since we're of a similar age, IBM. It was the IBM. It was the General Electric of the food hospitality business. All right.
Yeah, without question. If you wanted to be at the pinnacle of the restaurant industry, you went to work for Restaurant Associates.
And initially, you got involved with working at Kennedy Airport, right?
Started at Kennedy Airport as a steward, which was an entry-level position.
And that was at the International Hotel.
At the International, for Restaurant Associates, it was at the International Arrivals building.
Right.
I worked also at the International Hotel at the airport while I was in school. But I started there as a steward, and the advice we got coming out of school was don't spend more than 6 months in any one place. move around, particularly earlier in career. Well, I didn't follow that advice. 44 years later, I'm still here.
Now, when we got together, you were talking about the, and this people don't remember. At one time, airports, it was glamorous. I mean, people would go to the restaurants at the airports,
Yeah.
And the hotels that were accommodating the customers over there were really running operations,
Yeah.
finer restaurants.
Exactly. It's hard to believe today the notion of going to an airport if you're not taking a flight. But we had 3 destination restaurants at each of New York's major
Right,
airports.
the Newarker was one.
Newarker, the LaGuardia Terrace at LaGuardia, and the Golden Door at the IAB building at Kennedy Airport. These were restaurants that on holidays, we would do 400 or 500 dinners. People that would come, they would come with their families, and primarily they came for the excitement. They wanted to watch the planes take off and land, and they were provided with a first-rate, restaurant experience, unlike what you would find at airports today.
So from the airport, it was interesting, especially since Belmore, you end up in Westbury at the Roosevelt Raceway at a Harry Hemsley Hotel, the famed John Peel Room.
The John Peel Room. It was part of the Island Inn, which was the largest hotel at the time in Long Island, about 205 rooms. And we had a restaurant called the John Peel Room, which had been created by Restaurant Associates. And it was, it was quite an operation. It was extremely successful. It was part of the hotel, so that we were open for breakfast, lunch, dinner, banquets, room service. You got to do everything at at the John Peel. And surprisingly, more than 50% of our business came from non-hotel related activity. So it was a great learning experience for me. I spent quite a number of years there.
And you also innovative. You were, you gave away the New York Times on a Saturday night, right?
We were promoting brunch, which we had put together a 5-course brunch Sunday morning, and in order to promote it, we would give away the New York Times if you were having dinner with us Saturday night as a reminder to come for brunch the next morning. We gave you a New York Times in a bag of Fat Rascals, which are English soda biscuits.
So you spend about 6 years at the John Peel Room?
Yeah.
And then what happens?
Well, then I began to, I came into New York, began to supervise other restaurants for the company, both in and out of New York City. And
at this time, Joe Baum is no longer with the restaurant.
Joe Baum had been gone for quite some time by then. He had left the company approximately 1970. So we're talking now, it's 78, 79.
Now, but at this time, Restaurant Associates is a publicly held company.
Yes. Restaurant Associates was publicly held all along, yeah.
And what the main restaurants that RA was running at that time in New York were?
Well, we had the restaurants at that time around Rockefeller Center, which were called the Promenade Cafe. We had the Brasserie. There were restaurants in what was then the Pan Am building called Zoom Zoom and Charlie Brown's and the Trattoria. We had just a small smattering of food service operations at the Ford Foundation and at the Metropolitan Museum.
Now, one of the interesting things that when you came into New York is that you really were creative, because Flushing, it wasn't, not Flushing Meadow, the Forest Hill Stadium, people of our remember there were Harry M. Stevens, and people going to Harry M. Stevens was, you didn't get quality food at a sports venue. That was not the business at hand. And tell me a little bit about, what you were involved with, the innovative of RA&U with regard to Forest Hills.
Well, I had not been involved in sports catering till that point, and we received a phone call one day from a member of the Board of Trustees at the West Side Tennis Club, which operated the stadium at Forest Hills. And they were looking for a food service provider for the U.S. Open, which then ran for 12 days in early September. And we agreed to take it on. And we made quite a few mistakes that first year, learning about the business. And we did, I think, about $400,000 worth of business in the 2 weeks, or the 12 days that the tournament ran. And then we came back the following year, the same 12 days, and triple the revenue, just by correcting the mistakes that we did. So that was our first entree into the sports catering business.
But what you also did was you served Grey Poupon mustard over there.
We introduced food, which
you truly introduced food to the sports venues.
We did. I mean, by today's standards, the food was not all that adventurous. But back in 76, 77, we introduced Dijon mustard to be served on hot dogs. Had never been thought of before. We serve frankfurters and knockwurst steamed in beer with fresh sauerkraut. Now, as I said, in and of itself, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but for a sporting event 30 years ago, it was significant.
And you did quiche Lorraine, you said.
We introduced quiche Lorraine. We had fresh carved, we had roast beef sandwiches that were carved to order. We also introduced, very upscale menus for the catering that took place. I mean, part of the excitement at these tennis events and the golf events that we got into some years later is the catering that takes place. So essentially, we introduced restaurant quality food to these sporting venues.
Right. USPGA and other places, and then stadiums and
exactly
and so on. Now, what you also did during that period of time is this when you bought Charlie Brown's?
Charlie Brown's was acquired in the mid-'70s. And
Charlie Brown's was a steakhouse.
It was
American steak.
It was a neighborhood. It was a neighborhood steakhouse chain in New Jersey. We acquired it. They were
with a nice salad bar, if I remember.
There were 5 units. It included a salad bar, and a high quality but value oriented steak. And it was ultimately expanded to 40 stores.
And then besides
all in New Jersey.
And then you had Acapulco.
We also had acquired Acapulco, which was a chain of 50 Mexican restaurants in California. And we grew that, significantly over the years. That was sold 4 years ago.
So let's talk about, you had taken the company private, you and Max.
Well, there were two principals in the company, Max Pine and Martin Brody. They were the two senior partners, and there were 4 junior partners in the company. I was one of the junior partners. And in 1987, we took the company private. It had been a public company. The stock had been sort of dormant for a number of years. Began to show signs of life in the mid-'80s. And in '87, we made the attempt right during what would become Black Monday during that period of time, which held us up a bit, but we ultimately got it done. And we did take the company private and turned around and sold it to a Japanese firm about 2 years later. And the name of that firm was Kiyotaro. Kiyotaro was in the sushi business in Japan. They had 800 sushi outlets in and around Tokyo.
Now, you had no sushi places.
And they were, like a lot of companies at that time in 1990, they were acquiring, Japanese companies were acquiring.
Japanese companies were acquiring. They owned Rock Center at one time. They
Pebble
owned
Beach.
Cushman and Wakefield.
Yep.
They owned Pebble Beach. And they were buying everything that they could at that time. So they also
including us.
Including you guys into that business. And you were owned by them for how many years?
We were owned by Kiyotaro for 6 years, from 1990 through 1996. And at the time of the going private transaction, I had headed up the restaurant division for our company, and slowly began to assume responsibility for other parts of the company and became the company's CEO mid-1993. and went to Tokyo, met with Mr. Tanaka, who had been chairman of Kiyotaro, and asked him what he would like me to do with the company. And he was very clear and said that Restaurant Associates was an American company, should be run by an American, and that he would leave all of the operating decisions to American management, which was unlike what had been going on at that era, with other acquisitions that had been made by the Japanese. So I thought that he handled the company, very well. I had asked him at that point whether I could buy the company. He said, no, it's not for sale, but I'll talk to you when and if the time comes.
And then?
And then that time came in 1996. And things, as you know, had gotten, let's just say that things were not as good in Japan as they had been. And Mr. Tanaka had decided to sell the assets that he had acquired in the United States, and we were one of them. And I began, which I had never done before, to look around for some assistance, financing, so that we could get this.
Get the private equity boys.
We met with private equity folks for the first time, first time in my career. And at the time, Restaurant Associates was doing quite well. Charlie Brown's was doing well. And the chain of 50 Mexican restaurants, we were just on the cusp of having that business turned around. So initially, our meetings with the private equity folks didn't go as well as we would like. But then midway through, I had called a friend in the city who had been a client of ours, Roy Furman, of Furman Cells, and he introduced us to a couple of private equity firms, and together with Furman Cells, we were able to buy the company from Kiyotaro.
So you buy from Kiyotaro, and how does Compass come into the?
So when you, as you know, Michael, when you partner up with a private equity firm, generally speaking, there's a 3 to 5 year window. In our case, that 3 to 5 year window became 18 months. And 18 months later, the three businesses were all doing extremely well. We sold Charlie Brown's to another private equity firm. We sold the Mexican restaurants. We recapitalized and kept them in partnership with private equity. And RA, the jewel in the crown, we sold to Compass Group, which was the world's largest food service company at that time.
Based in London.
Based in London, but they had set up shop and had quite a significant business in North America.
1999, you meet, you're doing business here, but you do some business and you meet this famous chef who became your partner.
We were at that point owned by Compass Group, Restaurant Associates, and I was aware of and became familiar with Joachim Splichal, who is a celebrity chef based in Los Angeles. He had founded in 1989 with his wife Christine, had founded Patina, which was a restaurant on Melrose Avenue, and would go on to become the #1 rated restaurant in Los Angeles for 12 consecutive years in Zagat. Joachim had expanded his business along the way to include informal brasseries, and then had gotten also into food service, with food service at a couple of museums and performing arts centers. So in a certain way, Patina was the
West Coast.
A smaller version of Restaurant Associates on the West Coast. We at Restaurant Associates had gotten a couple of food service accounts on the West Coast. So we were at the crossroads. We were either going to add management to run that business, or we could acquire a business that had some operations and would have a management team.
So then you...
So we merged with Patina and Joachim in the very tail end of 1999, 2000, and we became Restaurant Associates Patina. Still wholly owned at that point by Compass Group.
So what happens later on? It's 2000 and...
So we hum along. In the meantime, the business grows fairly significantly. We expand our business into sports catering. We expand our business into B&I, business and industry, into museums and performing arts centers. And when I first joined Compass Group, everyone thought that you wouldn't last very long in that kind of an environment, in a big company environment, but the relationship was good, and joined the Compass board, in which I served on for the next 9 years. Along comes 2006, and Joachim and I, we negotiated a deal to acquire approximately half of what we had sold Compass. And we execute that deal in 2006, in July of 2006.
So now, so you and Joachim own
So
Patina
we did that with another
Japanese.
with another investor, another Japanese company by the name of Shidax, and we acquired, as I said, we acquired about 50% of the company. We kept all of the restaurants on the East Coast, a couple of selected food service accounts, and then all of our food service accounts and restaurants on the West Coast.
With 2 minutes left, let's talk about Meals on Wheels, which has been one of your pet things for many, many years.
When we conceived the new restaurants at Rockefeller Center in 1984, we wanted to open up and introduce the restaurants with a couple of major events, to essentially thank the city of New York for what it had done for us. And we had partnered with City Meals on Wheels, and we held the first American Chef's Tribute to James Beard with the help of Gail Green, who was one of the founders of City Meals on Wheels, she and James Beard. So that would become the first of 28 or 29 consecutive events in which we raise each year $1 million to feed New York's homebound elderly.
Let's talk about family. You're married?
Married very happily for 42 years to Linda, who I should thank.
2 daughters?
I have 2 daughters, Nicole and Danielle, both married. Danielle is married to Randy Smith, and I have 3 lovely grandchildren.
Names?
Sienna, Luca, and Marco. And my daughter Nicole, who married Graham Buck, is having her first child, possibly as we speak here.
So that would be a wonderful celebration. So, it's interesting for the kid who was born in Italy, who went to New York City Tech, who kept one job. I mean, in essence, how many years, Ari? 40?
It's now 44 years from the time I first started out at the airports.
Now, but what we said when we got together, the key to the success of a restaurant, the key to the success of a food service business, no matter what, is consistency, quality, and looking after the customers, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not, there's a lot of complicated parts of our business, but at its core, it's not all that complicated. You have to maintain quality and consistency and keep the facility in first-class condition.
So I'd like to thank you for being here today.
It was my pleasure.